Oh, it does?
You are live, sir.
Someone's coming in, so I'm just gonna wait. Alrighty, well, good morning, everyone, on this fabulous day. Okay, so today we are continuing our discussion on access concentration, which is the main objective of this semester. And so I'm hoping that all our preliminary work will help you get to this point that we are trying to aspire to. So basically, access concentration is the goal of our meditation practice. Well, one of the goals of our meditation practice. And as the name suggests, access concentration is essentially the mindset that gives you access into the higher levels of consciousness or the higher levels of your meditation practice. So everything that we're doing, all the methods and techniques and practices that we have been using will hopefully help you or guide you to get to that point of access. And once we're at that point, it's at that mindset where we can work on developing and deepening and advancing our practice. So as we go through the practices or methods, for this time around, we will mainly just focus on using the breath as our object of meditation. But really, essentially, you can pretty much use anything. So you can either visualize something, you can use a mantra, we can use different techniques of breath work. But anyway, the point is to be fully absorbed in that object of meditation, that it is completely one-pointed. So for the most part, when we're meditating, we usually have our object of meditation kind of in the background, right? Especially if you're new or you haven't really practiced long enough. Our object of meditation is typically in the background, and all our distractions, our wandering thoughts are kind of in the foreground, right? Because they're, for the most part, more dominant than the object of meditation, right? Because you're practiced, I don't know, whatever. Not practiced enough, right? But when we enter access meditation, there's a shift in our mind where now our object of meditation comes and moves to the foreground, and those distractions and thoughts become in the background, right? There's this complete shift that we will totally notice when it happens. And so we move from having those distractions arise and distract us, right? And we kind of entertain them sometimes, right? We're not completely aware of them right away. But once we're practiced enough, right? And once we develop that concentration, that focus and one-pointedness on our object of meditation, then there's that mind shift where now that object of meditation, you're wholly with it, fully with it. And all those distractions and thoughts become kind of this whispering in the background, right? They don't really cause you an actual distraction, right? They're still there, but they're subtle. But they're subtle and they're not big enough to take you away from your object of meditation, right? You notice them more quickly, right? And you're aware of them more quickly and you're able to let them go quickly. But before that shift happens, you'll notice that sometimes our distractions take hold of us, maybe for a few seconds, maybe for a few minutes, maybe for your entire session, right? You're completely unaware that you're distracted. You have this entertaining thought of what you're going to do after class or what you're going to do this weekend, right? And you just kind of play with this entire mental movie, right? And sometimes it'll take you a few minutes to notice, or it may take you the whole session, whatever, right? But it is the dominant feature in the session, right? But after we start practicing and after we start meditating and becoming more aware of those distractions, they will become way subtler and they will lessen eventually. But we really just have to ensure that we're able to catch them as quickly as possible, right? Because I always say it's not important to not think, right? That's not really the objective of meditation, because it's impossible to not think, right? Even when you enter these higher levels of consciousness, there's still going to be lingering thoughts in the background, but they're not big enough to distract you. But in the first earlier stages, they do become distractions, right? And they do tend to take over our session. But it's important to, as we practice and we become more mindful and become more aware of our object of meditation, it'll be easier to catch those distractions. It'll be easier to notice them more quickly so that we can recognize it, be aware of it, and allow it to be and go, and so we can go back to the object of meditation. But once we're practiced enough and we notice that shift, that mental shift, where object meditation is in the foreground and it's completely there, then we just want to stay with it, right? At that point, once you're with it long enough, you're like halfway through the access concentration door. You have one door open. The other door opens up when the object of meditation no longer becomes the object of meditation, meaning that you no longer need that object of meditation to stay focused or concentrated, right? Because if you're using the breath, for instance, as your object of meditation, right, whether you're counting or just making the mental notes of in and out, once we're able to let go of the labeling, right, and just let our meditation be, then another mental shift happens where we will start to, where something called piti in Pali arises. Piti means, it's usually translated like as bliss or rapture, right? It's kind of like a state of ecstasy or bliss, right? It is a physical sensation that kind of happens, right? And sometimes it can be very subtle, so it can be like a little tingling, maybe in the hands, right, or in the body somewhere. There's this really joyous, static feeling in our body, right? It's where physical ecstasy, basically. Like, I don't know how else to explain it, but it's a very good feeling in the body that kind of that happens, that arises. And for the most part, and from what people have told me, there's always a kind of tingling or warm sensation, right? It's just your body feels good, or maybe a certain part in the body feels really good, right? You're completely absorbed in the object of meditation, and then that shift happens where you just feel really good. Like, you just feel good. So it's literally a physical sensation. And sometimes it's very subtle. It's not a big deal. Like I said, maybe it's a little tingling, maybe it's a little warmth somewhere. Or it could really just kind of erupt, right? Just have this huge bodily sensation, feeling of just awesomeness, right? Or it kind of happens like popcorn, right? There's those little bursts that come up every once in a while, right? Oh, here I feel good over here, and then I feel good over here, and I feel good over here, and I feel good over here, right? It's like a little popcorn effect, which is more common than any other sensation that happens. But once we're able to take notice and feel and really be absorbed in that good feeling, then you're officially in the Access concentration door. And that's where we want to be and able to, for us to continue developing and advancing our practices. Because in Buddhist meditation, in the concentration side of it, right, because as we mentioned before, there's the concentration, there's the contemplation, samatha and vipassana. And so in samatha, the goal there is samadhi, which is ultimate one-pointedness concentration. But in that side of concentration, there's a practice called the entering the dhyanas or the jhanas, right? These are 4 levels of higher consciousness that we aspire to attain. And access concentration is like the preliminary prerequisite to entering the first jhana. But that first jhana or dhyana is that feeling of rapture, of joy. It's one of the first pieces of it. But that's really our kind of goal here for the most part, is to be able to not necessarily get to that point, but at least get to a point of pretty strong concentration, right? Because we really have to develop our concentration in order to really meditate correctly. Because otherwise, if you're just sitting, what are you sitting for, right? If you're just sitting and you're thinking about your to-do list and what to do here and what to do there, where to go, what to eat, who to talk to, blah, 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 right? If you're just thinking, then what's the point of your meditation? You're just wasting time. So there has to be a real purpose to it, right? Whether your purpose is mundane, like you're just trying to slow down your mind or release some anxiety or whatever may be, stress, right? If that's your goal, that's perfectly fine. If your goal is a little bit more spiritual, then that's perfectly fine. But there has to be a purpose to the meditation other than just sitting, right? So for us here though, our goal, our purpose is to develop that strong concentration. From the Buddhist perspective, to really be able to attain any form of liberation or enlightenment or any of those aha moments, we really have to be able to master the concentration piece so that we can then contemplate the Dharma, contemplate the phenomena of the world, right? And that's where the aha and the liberation and enlightenment moments come. But we can't contemplate something if we don't know how to concentrate. Because otherwise, if we're trying to contemplate on an important topic, but we're constantly distracted and multitasking and overthinking, then you're not contemplating correctly, right? So in order to contemplate correctly, we have to be able to concentrate correctly. In order to concentrate, we really have to work on those mental factors and being able to fully be with our meditation object, to be able to distinguish, to verify, and to let go of the 5 hindrances, right? Because if we eventually, once we get to the higher levels of the jhanas and the consciousnesses, higher levels of consciousness, those hindrances will naturally lessen or fade away. They may not be completely gone, but they're gone enough where they're not really hindrances. They're just boops. They're little nudges in our meditation practice. But they may still be there. But as we practice and as we become more aware of how the hindrances arise, why they're arising, what they're doing to us, and being able to remedy them as they happen and arise, then we're practicing correctly, right? And now we're able to distinguish when the hindrances happen, we're able to know what to do with them when they do arise, and we're able to take care of them and let them go and let them be and continue on with our meditation object. So, as I mentioned, we'll be using the breath as our meditation object, and I always give 3 main methods that I think work the best for most people. And I'll briefly go over those today. Because today our meditation our sitting session will be combination of chanting and sitting. Anyway, I'll go to that afterward. So the three methods, So we'll do the chanting, walking, sitting meditation today. So if you haven't been to one of our sessions where we do this, we're essentially going to be starting off with walking meditation first, chanting Amitabha. Amitabha is the name of a Buddha, one of the Buddhas. And we use Amitabha just because it's short and it's easy to chant fast. Because as we sit, we'll continue to chant as we're walking, and we'll continue to chant, we'll sit down and continue to chant. But once we sit down, then we kind of speed up the chanting. And for every ring of the bell, when I do, we're going to speed it up and speed it up and speed up until we get to a point of just noise, maybe almost. And we go back and slow it out again. And a good thing, and one of the best parts of this is that once we're done chanting, then we have this really great vibration in our body, right? This very nice warmth and tingling in our body. And for the most part, that's kind of something that you would feel once we enter that first jhana. If we ever get to that point, that's almost the same sensation. But anyway, we do that kind of chanting and meditation because it's very effective in being able to focus and use that as our object of meditation, right? Because as we're chanting and we're trying to keep up, especially when we start going faster, our whole attention, our whole awareness is just on the chanting piece, right? So there's very little room for distractions to happen. There's very little room for thoughts to arise that'll distract us away from the chanting. So it's a very effective method to use. And so we'll do that today. But once we stop the chanting piece, right, then we sit for the remainder of our session, just enjoying that feeling of calmness. But it's at that point where we have to shift back and use an object of meditation, right? Because our object of meditation was the chanting, and now that we're not chanting anymore, we need to bring back our object. And so now we have to bring back our breathing, right? We're using our breath as object meditation. So anyway, the three methods of breath meditation here is, the first one is the most traditional, which is just counting, right? So as we breathe in and we breathe out, we count 1, mentally make the mental note, in, out 2, in, out 3, in, out 4, up until 10. And then at that point, we can either restart and go back to 1, or we can shift down or move down backward from 10 to 1, right? If you want a little extra challenge here, it's not that hard, but typically we would repeat, but I usually just count back down from 10 to 1. But anyway, so during that piece, if by chance you got distracted or you lost count, then you simply just restart back at 1, right? And so that counting, that you're not just counting, but you're also just being aware of the breath, right? As you breathe in and breathe out, you're being mindful of the movement and the sensations of the breath, right, as you're counting. The second method is being mindful of the specific areas of the body as you breathe in, right? And this is also a very effective method. So we pretty much just kind of go in sequence. So as you're breathing in, you're just being aware of the air entering and exiting your nose, right? You're feeling the sensation of air, right, through your nostrils. And you're just being mindful of how it feels, right? Is the air warm? Is it cold? Are you breathing heavily? Is it shallow? Are you breathing in long or short breaths, right? You're just being mindful of how the air and breath moves, right? Being concentrated at the tip of your nose. Then you do that for maybe like 5 breaths, right? Or more, however you want to use. But then you shift your attention back to kind of the back of your throat, right? Where the air is kind of moving from the nose down your neck, right? And you're just being mindful of the air moving in and out, in and out. Then you shift your attention down to your throat or neck, right? Feel the air in, out, in, out, in, out. Then shift your attention to your lungs, right? Being mindful of your lungs expanding, contracting in, out, up and down, whatever, however you want to label it. And then from there, you shift it to your whole body. So you just feel your whole body take in the air, right? Breathing in, breathing out, you're feeling the whole body. And then you just move backward, right? You go from the whole body to the lungs, to the neck, the back of your throat, to your nose, and kind of just use that sequence of going up and down, up and down. The third method is a method I call +1. And it's my go-to method, and for me, it's the most effective. And depending on where I'm meditating, usually I try to use a sound of a clock, the ticking of the clock, because I use the ticks as my I'm looking for. I use the sound of the clock as just the kind of like a metronome, pretty much, right? It signals when to count. But anyway, so using the metronome, for instance, right, which I actually use a metronome, but using the metronome or using the sound of the clock, so you're really just counting for every tick, right? So as it ticks, you're just counting 1, and then it ticks again, you count 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're really just adding one number, right? So +1, that's what I call it. And you do this up until 10 or more. I usually go 30, because when I do 30 and I do that sequence twice, I know that I've meditated for 20 minutes. So I use that as a keeping track of how long I'm sitting. But anyway, so you're really just counting and adding that 1, right, up until 10, and then from at that point, again, you can either restart and go back to 1, or as an extra challenge, reset and go down from 10 to 1, right? And this is pretty difficult usually it's difficult for most people, because it's very easy to, once you're distracted or once you lose count, it's easy that if and when you get distracted, you lose count, right? Or you skip a number, or you forget a number, or something happens, right? And so it's really difficult to stay focused completely where you're not losing count, or you don't lose what's happening or what's going on, right? So it really forces you to be very concentrated. It forces you to be super hyper-focused and concentrated on the numbering and on where you are and where you left off, right? Because at that point, it's very easy to forget your place. It's very easy to know where you left off. So for me, that's the most effective method, and I usually use that when I'm in longer sessions. So usually if I'm meditating for at least 30 or plus more minutes, then I use that method, because it's very, very effective. But any of those methods can be very effective if you use it correctly. But anyway, so as we practice and as we keep up with our object of meditation and become very hyper-focused and super focused on that, and eventually you'll see that shift, right? That shift of that meditation object really coming into the foreground versus staying in that background. And then once you're in that kind of mental zone, and some of the signals that kind of helps you identify that you're in or entering access concentration is the shallowness of the breath, right? Because even though the breathing or the breath is your object of meditation, but it will naturally and eventually slow down, right? And be very shallow it may even be to a point where it feels like you're not even breathing, right? Because it's very short, it's very shallow, and you're just kind of like sitting there. And so noticing that it feels like you're not even breathing is a sign that you're entering the door of access concentration. And once you're there, and once you've noticed that you're super focused and the object meditation is becoming very strong, at that point, hopefully you may start to notice that the piti feelings, right? The feelings of joy and rapture or bliss, right? Again, it can be very subtle. And usually, for the most part, for most people, it begins in their hands or maybe even in the chest area. Or anywhere else, right? It may take you a little bit of time to really pinpoint where in the body it feels very good, where it feels kind of tingly or warm, or just, a very good sensation, right? And if you're able to notice in the body, where in the body that is, then that feeling becomes your object of meditation, right? Because you really no need to use the breath as the object, because eventually you being hyper-focused on it will just naturally kind of fade away. And as those feelings of piti arise, the rapture and the joy arise, then that becomes strong enough, right? Because you want to hold on to it, you want to allow it to grow and get stronger. And once it's strong enough, then you shift your object meditation from the breath to that feeling in the body. And sometimes it's not as easily noticed. Sometimes it may take some time for it to really grow, because again, it can act like popcorn, right? It can come and go, right? It may not always sit there constantly, but once you notice where those feelings are happening, whether it's in your hand, in your head, or in your chest, then stay with it, right? It will naturally grow on its own, right? You don't have to force it to be like, hey, feel better, right? It'll naturally grow as you become more concentrated and become more focused, right? But that's the object, or that's the feeling that we want to hold on to. And then from there, then we are able to kind of expand our meditation practice and go to the different levels. But that is one of the first levels that we really need to get to first. But in order to get there, we really have to be able to be really concentrated, right? Masters of concentration. Okay, I will stop there. And we will start with our walking meditation, chanting Amitabha, and then sit down and speed that up. But anyway, before we start, any questions, concerns, emotional outbursts?
I know this might be a weird question, but is there any, to the chanting, is there anything that we should know if it's our first time?
No, just chant along. Amitabha, 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 Amitabha. Okay, well, if there is no questions, then we will rise and start with our walking first. I use this line as the Amitabha, 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 Mitaba